Are these all set up? I can. Can I just do that?
Yeah.
Okay, forward. Okay. Okay. Hey. Happy Research Day. Oh my gosh. Happy Research Day. Yeah. Welcome, family, to the University of Maryland Department of Psychiatry Annual Research Day Grand Rounds. My name is Gloria Reeves. I'm honored to serve as your vice chair. Oh, the crowd is warmed up. Excellent. I'm honored to serve as your vice chair of research in the department and equally honored to serve as your MC for today's event. I would like to invite anybody who presented a poster this morning. If you're a junior faculty member, a trainee, a staff member who presented a poster, please stand to be recognized. Please remain standing. Please remain standing. Please remain standing. Stand up. This group takes instruction well. Please raise your hand if this is the first time you've ever presented a poster at a conference. All right, little extra round of applause. Amazing. You may now sit. And I'd like to congratulate you on your incredible achievement, but also congratulate our other family members who are the mentors who got you to this opportunity today. So thank you so much to our research mentors. Let's give them a round of applause. Before we kick off the program, I'd like to invite our distinguished chair, Dr. Jill Rockbeisel, to provide some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Gloria. Great minds think alike. We should have compared notes. So I just have a few comments. I also would like to welcome you to the Department of Psychiatry's 2025 Research Day. It has been an exciting morning, seeing the hard work and the success of our students, our staff, our trainees, and our junior faculty. I'm so proud of everyone, not only those individuals who have shown posters on display for us to learn, broadening our perspectives and our minds, but also everyone behind those posters, as Gloria just pointed out, who encouraged, mentored, and coached those posters to the finish line. So I just am so impressed. To that point, I wonder if anyone has ever thought about the difference between coaching and mentoring, because our Dr. Reeves is both of those. So coaching is often performance-driven and structured to aiming to like a specific, tone-specific skills for a specific purpose, like a basketball coach. You know, ball handling skills to make the points. Gloria is a phenomenal coach. She, what does she do? Well, she helps people learn the skills to put a poster together. And the end game is today. And she's done a great job. We wouldn't be here without Gloria and her whole team. Catherine also is a phenomenal input to, everyone is input to it. Mentoring, on the other hand, is more relationship-based, providing guidance and support for career development and overall growth. Again, Gloria connects people. She pushes junior people up. And she, again, has done a phenomenal job of mentoring. So thank you, Gloria, for all your work. And thank you all for coming. There's much more to come, so I'm going to hand you back to Gloria.
Thank you, Jill. It's a little surreal to get compliments from my first therapy supervisor when I was a medical student. So we've come a long way together. Thank you, Jill. All right. I would like to add to the acknowledgements. But first, I want to share a little bit what the agenda is today. So today is not a typical grand rounds. So instead of an hour, we are meeting for 90 minutes. I promise we will stop on time. And that's to allow some time for some annual awards. So we're going to start out with some different types of awards to really highlight the outstanding work by our rising stars and faculty here. And then we will have a short transition activity, and then we'll launch into our keynote presentation. So I wanted to share who are the teams that put together Research Day. So Research Day really takes a village, and there's 3 different teams of people I want to highlight. So these are the folks who attend our monthly Research Steering Committee activity. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to them. As a scientist, I decided to compile some data. So I took the names of each of them and I compiled how many emails, texts, and calls I send them to ask for guidance and support. And I've color coded it. So if the name is in red, it means I call you very often. If your name is in brown, I call you very frequently. And if your name is in green, a lot of the time. There's not one slacker in this bunch. These people live and breathe supporting research development in our department. We're extremely, extremely grateful to have them. Now, one of the challenges, though, when you're hanging out with luminaries who are figuring out the roadmap for science of our department is sometimes you need a different type of team to support you when you're new to getting involved in research. That's where our other team comes into play. This is our Community Engagement Research Subcommittee. These are folks who we have the roadmap developed for science in our department. These are people who make sure you have a tank of gas, you have somebody to ride shotgun when you don't know what size poster you need to print, folks who give a lot of encouragement and support. So the research subcommittee of the Community Engagement Committee in the department is really to make sure there's no barriers to your participating in research. Every member of our department, staff, trainees, faculty, is needed. We want you at the table to participate in research. So we're very grateful for the behind the scenes folks who helped plan this event, but also supported individuals who are presenting for the very first time. And you'll notice the size of this group is the same as the size of our other group. You'll also notice another thing on here is the one person who's in both groups is our chair, Dr. Jill Rockbeisel. The third group I want to thank is our amazing group of poster judges led by the incredible Dr. Sarah Clark. Sarah has an important role in our department in not just organizing this event, but she also, she's a basic scientist and she helps teach our clinical residents, the psychiatry residency program. So she's done some incredible work. We're very grateful to all the poster judges who really encouraged our rising stars today. So we have some awards that we're going to give out. The first, the first is going to be, we have some trainee poster awards, and I'm going to invite to congratulate the award winners, our chair, Jill, if you could come forward. But also, as I mentioned, we have our Research Steering Committee and our Community Engagement Committee. So I'd like to invite our Chief of Community Engagement, Dr. Anik Forrester, to also come. And let's give them a big round of applause. So the way this works is Sarah will provide some introduction, and she will mention, she will announce the award winners. We have a little thing we're going to give you because we just figured out who won, so we didn't have time to print up certificates. So we have a little mental health gift for you. So you get one of 2 gifts. Gift number 1 has a wellness plant. If you grow the plant and there's any kind of green coming out of it, if you take a picture, you can upload it on a website and you can donate a plant to a school. All you have to do is just take a picture and they'll donate a plant to a school. It also has Truth or Dare wellness game in there, so wellness. So there's 3 of those. One random person was selected to get the 4th gift, which is just honestly just a crate of stress balls to share with your friends. So who will it be? We will see. All right, take it away, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. All right, so I'll just reiterate what Jill and oh my gosh, my brain has been doing this. Gloria said it just a few minutes ago. Another exciting day. Thank you guys all for being here. I also want to shout out a big thank you to my judging team, already acknowledged up there, but without them going through and judging all these, I would not have this list in front of me. So without further ado, if I call your name, please come up to the front so that we can acknowledge you and give you your fun gifts. And try to hold your applause a little bit, because as people are coming up, I'm going to continue to introduce the next one. So hopefully we'll keep everything flowing well. Where do you just stand? We're going to do a picture. And we're going to do a picture. So everybody stand up here and be ready to take a picture. All right, so based on this year's submissions, we have two major categories: the quality improvement posters and what we consider more of the traditional research poster. Within the traditional research poster, we actually have both observational studies as well as hypothesis testing studies. And then within the hypothesis testing studies, we have preclinical and clinical categories. So in total, we're going to be giving out 4 awards. And we do this in part, like Gloria said, to recognize we are a clinical department. We do a wide variety of interactions with research, from very basic, working with my mice and my rats, all the way up into the community policy generating changes at the community level. And we want to acknowledge that, and that's why we do this. So when we're talking about quality improvement, healthcare is a dynamic, ever-changing system that can be challenging both for healthcare providers as well as patients. The quality improvement is an integral process of this system in order to make sure that we can address some of these challenges and maintain high standards of care to our patients. So when we're talking about QI projects, these projects are designed to achieve measurable improvements over time. And your presenters today had the challenge of taking what might be a very small study, and with a lot of words and not a lot of, pretty pictures or data, and expressing that information to the audience and being able to do it in a way that was engaging. So the winner of this quality improvement poster this year is Peter McIver. Peter, please go ahead and come up. All right, and then when we're talking about traditional research posters, of course, these are the things that we think of as traditional research. But they span a variety of different approaches, from case studies to randomized control trials to actual meta-analysis, going back and looking at other work that people have done. We do separate our categories into 2, the observational, more hypothesis-generating studies, and then the hypothesis testing studies. So first, I want to acknowledge the observational studies. These are usually those studies that are going to form the basis of future experimentation. And they range from things like case studies, where you have anecdotal, stories about things that you see at the very on the ground working with patients. These are the things that are generating questions so that people like me later on can go and look at models and try to figure out with animals what's happening. So they really are the foundation of what we are doing. They can also look at retrospective studies, et cetera. Similar to QI projects, they can be challenging to present. So again, I want to make sure that we show that even using surveys and doing things like that, you're still able to really talk about your work and get excited about it. And that comes across really well. And the person who did an exceedingly well job this year that we want to acknowledge is Alice Mullen. All right, and now on to the experimental studies. And for these, we have both preclinical and clinical, ranging from working with those mice and rats and zebrafish and flies, all the way up to actually working with people. These are testing those hypotheses. And they usually end up with a lot of data that they have to talk about very quickly and can be very overwhelming and have all of these different things on their posters. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that. So I want to acknowledge for our preclinical winner is Musa Abajola. And then for the clinical research category is Sarah Milrod. So finally, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the staff and research assistants and research scientists, the guys who are doing the work in the labs and in the departments, still doing research, but aren't part of technically our trainee group. You guys contribute a huge part to our research diversity in the department and to the success of us as we move forward. I want to give a special highlight and shout out to a high schooler who joined us today and had enough gumption to get up here and present a poster. And so, Sonia G, if you could come up and join us.
You invite Dee to come up as well.
And Dee. Dee, if you would like to come up. This is the future, as all of you guys are. So thank you very much, everybody.
Congratulations. For the next award, I would like to invite Miss Kitty Simpson to join Jill at the front. This next award is the Betty Hughes Foundation Grant. Thank you for coming. The grant is an award earned by a faculty member in our department to conduct pilot research related to child mental health work. So this honors the great tradition of the work done by Dr. Betty Hughes. And we are so honored to have a representative from the foundation here as a regular partner to this event. So Kitty, I was thinking next year we'll make you judge posters. I don't think you've missed a research day event except for the pandemic. So we're going to start upping your responsibilities as you come. We're very grateful to have a foundation that cares about asking people, what are you interested in? Tell me about your science, and really building a relationship with our department. So one more time, thank you so much. And without any further ado, oh, I'm sorry. Do I have the certificate? Hold on 1 second. I mean, of course we have the certificates. They're coming up right now. Just to add to the tension. So this year's award winner is Dr. Cindy Schaefer. Cindy's project is a double win for us. It's called a family-based app support to help teens address teen substance abuse in rural Maryland, an implementation feasibility study. Try saying that 3 times very fast. So this, as I understand it, involves a collaboration between the child division and the addictions division, which is really an added bonus. So congratulations to Cindy. All right. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Kitty. We'll make you give it out next year, Kitty. Don't worry. Okay. Our final award is truly a very prestigious award. This is a Junior Research Faculty Award, which was generously donated by the Jarbo family, who, from their own lived experience, wanted to make a strong commitment to the next generation of mental health researchers. So we're honored to recognize this award in the Jarbo family name. We have many phenomenal junior faculty in our department, so it's always an incredibly tough decision to select just one person. I'm not going to reveal the winner to this award because I've asked somebody else to do it. Dr. Todd Gould, if you could please come forward. So Dr. Gould is a research division director here, one of our research leaders, and happens to be a mentor of somebody who might be quite happy in a few minutes. So I'll let him reveal.
All right, so I'll start with the announcement. So this year's Jarber Award goes to Majed Haraz. And I'm going to take just a couple minutes for those that don't know Majed, to talk a bit about him. So Majed joined our department about 2.5 years ago, following training with Sol Snyder's laboratory at Hopkins. And those that don't know Sol Snyder, he's one of the greatest experimentalists, pharmacologists of our time. So Majed is a molecular and cellular neuroscientist by training. And that's how he's established his lab. He's established a unique niche, both in our department as well as the entire neuroscience community that's focused on cellular and molecular neuroscience. He's a great collaborator. He's already been successful so far with grants, including recipient of a Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. And he's very close, working towards first NIH grants as well. He exemplifies a lot of the qualities that we hope to see in our junior faculty. And I think you saw from some of the earlier slides that Gloria presented that he's on the outreach committee. I saw you were on the poster review committee. He's also a very vibrant participant in our university program in neuroscience, which is our PhD training program in neuroscience at the university, where he plays a couple roles. One is as on our retreat committee. And then secondly, he's for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, he's been co-director of our first neuroscience course that the students teach. That's current topics in neuroscience. So we have about 12 or 15 PhD and MD PhD students every year, and Majed is responsible for their first introduction to neuroscience that first semester of their training. So having really a huge impact on the training and the career development and ultimately the successes of many students in that regard. He's also, I just want to mention his contribution to mentoring the next generation of scientists, and many of us are involved in graduate student education or residency education. Majed goes a step further. He has a number of both college students, but as well as high school students that spend time training in his laboratory. And about now is a really exciting time on the floor that we co-occupy in MSTF 9, because every summer Majed brings in, I think, 10 or 12 students last year, right? I think a dozen students, again, ranging from college students and high school students, who are all being impacted in a very significant way. And it is really amazing, Jill, that I've always, it's always fantastic to see the vibrancy in our research area with these young people, and Majed's interest and his passion in supporting them. So great things so far, and we look forward to great things in the future as well. Congratulations.
You got, okay. All the parents come together. Sent Majed an email last night saying, hey, we're going to take a photo together tomorrow. So just wanted to let you know. So I'm not sure if he guessed. All right. So before we introduce our keynote speaker, I wanted to share a brief reflection about the topic that we're going to be discussing today. Now, anybody who knows me knows I love a good PowerPoint presentation. In fact, my family thoroughly enjoys my annual vacation planning slides, which, not to brag, are both informative and thought-provoking. But we are in unusual times, And in the spirit of rising stars, I invited a couple of rising stars from the UMBC dance department to share these thoughts. So I've never done this before, but it's a time for trying new things. So here we go. So I've been thinking a lot about the meaning of words. So I did a deep dive, went down a rabbit hole to look up the history of the term scientist, which was surprisingly and delightfully memorialized by a female science writer named Mrs. Mary Somerville in the 1800s. Mrs. Somerville wrote books to explain scientific terms and ideas to the lay public. She documented that the word scientist was invented during an 1833 meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. There was a heated debate at this meeting over what to call what was previously referred to as cultivators of science. Some experts advocated for the term natural philosopher, a favored term which was already being used. However, this term was criticized and dismissed by an outside agitator who smugly noted that philosophers are luminaries that focus on thoughts, whereas scientists do a lot of menial, hands-on experiments. Another expert proposed the term savant. This too was quickly rejected as, quote, rather assuming, since not everyone is that advanced, and even more problematic, the word was French. There was also an attempt to translate a commonly used German term, which I will not attempt to pronounce. But this option was also indignantly rejected because the closest of the English equivalents were nature poker, nature peeper, or my personal favorite, nature curious. The chair of this meeting, William Whewell, suggested to take inspiration instead and name us after the commonly used term of artist. He pointed out that everyone knew the word artist and that it represented people who worked in different mediums of art, including painters, musicians, and poets. Thus, the term scientist could refer back to people who worked in different domains of learning and discovery, including disciplines like mathematics and physics. More importantly, and this is really what ties in our theme today, it aligns with a commonly used word, so it'd be easy for the layperson to connect with it. Today, we were convening to discuss a term that's also quite easy for the public to connect with, and that is loneliness. Unlike other topics we've spoken about at prior Research Day events, this is a term familiar to everyone in the room. And in some ways, that may make it seem less scientific. But it allows us a unique opportunity. We can start a conversation with community stakeholders, clinicians, scientists, anyone at the table to share awareness and discuss a common human experience. In simple terms, it's an opportunity for us to regain common ground during divisive times. I believe that we are the right people, or as Whewell termed, the right scientists to do this work. We are experts in social connectivity across the lifespan. We thrive in interdisciplinary collaboration. We integrate lived experience in our work. And most of all, we, as a group, like to do really hard things. I mean, really hard things. And unlike Whewell, who sadly met his demise randomly falling off a horse, we will try to remain balanced as we learn from our speaker today about how to approach this topic. Many thanks to our UMBC dance choreographers and performers. Sarah McHale, and Rhea Murphy, I look forward to seeing you at my family vacation planning meeting next week. Thank you. So now that we're in a common space, I am honored to turn the podium over to Dr. Laura Rowland, professor and director of the Center for Brain Imaging Research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. And I wanted to say publicly, Laura gets 100% of the credit for both identifying the content area that we need at this time and also sending an excellent speaker our way and reaching out to the speaker. So our department is very grateful to Laura for setting this up. So thank you, Dr. Rowland, and please come forward.
Hi, everyone. First, I'm blown away. I think this is the most fun research day I have ever been to. And dancers, can you come to all of our events? No, that was amazing. So Gloria, thank you. All right. So I have the pleasure or honor of introducing Dr. Liz Necka. So she is the Associate Director of Lifespan and Aging Research at the National Institute of Mental Health. She's a national leader in lifespan aging and mental health research efforts. She's held key leadership positions at both National Institute of Aging and National Institute of Mental Health, where she's shaped major scientific priorities and national policy. Her work has guided NIH efforts on social connectedness and health, and she has served as an advisor to the Office of the Surgeon General on government-wide strategies to address social disconnection. Today, she's going to be presenting future directions in loneliness research, helping us distinguish between concepts like loneliness and social isolation, understand their impact on health, and explore critical new directions in the field. So please help me welcome Liz Necka to the podium. All right.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you all today, and I'm really excited to be here. And congratulations to everyone for what seems like a wonderful research day and for the award winners for your great presentations. I'm going to speak today about future directions in loneliness research. I have nothing to disclose, but I do want to note that the views expressed here do not represent the United States government. And I have been asked to do this as a bit of a TED Talk style. So please join me on this journey. All right, so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is close your eyes and think to yourself, how often do you feel that you have someone you can confide in about important topics? Really think about that person. And imagine how often do you think that they would be there for you in hard times? Now, think about the last time you went to your physician's office and think about whether or not that was a question that your physician, your primary care doctor, asked you. How would that interaction have changed if they asked you about the people that were important in your life? You can go ahead and open your eyes. If you're anything like me, my last visit to the doctor, I filled out a questionnaire about my marital status and do I have kids? And I was asked, do I smoke? Do I exercise? What do I eat? And then in passing, it was acknowledged that I have kids, and there was a shared moment of connection with my provider about the chaos of having young children. And then we moved on. And yet, social integration is critical for our health, for morbidity and mortality. And our medical system acknowledges this, but doesn't have the research, doesn't have the work that tells us what to do with that. And so this potential vital sign, social integration, is often left under-examined in moments when it's really most needed. So I'm going to start with a figure that was really compelling to me when I got involved in my research career. And what you can see here, this figure is from 1988, and across multiple different prospective longitudinal samples following different individuals across the country, we see that higher levels of social integration on the bottom right are associated with lower levels of mortality. And this effect is pretty robust. Fast forward to 2 decades later when I entered the field, and we're much better at quantifying the impact of social connection on health. So this here is a meta-analysis that was done to examine the impact of our social relationships on mortality. So meta-analysis is looking across multiple different studies and trying to ascertain the effect in the literature. And what you can see here is that social relationships, these complex measures of social integration, have an outsized effect on our health, more than traditional measures of health risk factors such as smoking or alcohol consumption or physical activity across a wide variety of studies. But why? What is it that's so protective about social relationships and health? So this is a really tricky question to answer, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. So if you look at the number of publications that are based on social integration and health across time, starting in 1988 when that publication appeared, you can see that we've made some progress. This is a question that has ignited interest amongst scientists, but not as much as we might expect. So when that meta-analysis was published in the year 2010, we had about 292 publications. And flash forward to last year, and there were less than 2,000 publications that were published on social integration and health. But if we look at loneliness and health, you can see it's disproportionately completely different scales of focus on loneliness and health. So in 2010, we had 645 publications, nearly 3 times as many publications on loneliness and health as social integration and health. And last year, there were nearly 6 times as many publications. So if we're interested in trying to understand why social integration is so critical for health, why is most of the bulk of the research here is focusing on loneliness? This was a question that I was sort of wondering when I was trying to think about how can I understand the ways in which social integration impact our health. And I was raised by an engineer. My dad's an engineer, and there were times in my childhood where there were broken electronics all over the place, where he was trying to put them back together to figure out how they work. And this is a common approach to reverse engineer something. So if we're trying to understand how social integration can be beneficial for health, it could be useful. A useful model could be to look at instances where social integration appears or feels to be lacking, like loneliness. So loneliness is a discrepancy between one's desired and one's perceived social relationships. So what's key here is that this is all about social cognitions within an individual. You could think about loneliness a little bit like a thermostat. So I might prefer to have the house at 68 degrees. You might prefer to have it at 72 degrees. If you were in my house, you might be a little bit cold, but I'm perfectly comfortable. And there might be instances, momentary changes, contextual things like I'm sick and so I feel a little bit cold, I might turn the thermostat up. But generally, I have a point at which I'm comfortable and I can address that as needed. I can change my environment if that comes out of a misalignment. Meanwhile, social isolation is an objective lack of social connections. So in the thermostat example, the house being at 68 or 72 degrees is an objective measure of the temperature in the house. An objective social isolation, lack of social interactions, can be because people don't have social ties to connect with, or because they're not connecting with the ties that they already have, but they're not having many social interactions. These both fall under an umbrella term that's focused on social connection, which in other fields is called social integration. But because social connection and social integration are multifaceted, they address many different components of social relationships. They address not only the perceptions and the desires, the sort of cognitive aspects of things, they also address the structural factors. Who do you have ties with? How close are those ties? And they address qualitative aspects of social relationships. So what is the quality, how positive or negative are the interactions that you're having there? And these are really complex concepts. And so we focus on loneliness because it allows us to look at one single individual. Why is it that there's this outsized focus on loneliness? Well, it might be because loneliness is potentially the most malleable of all of these constructs. So remember, loneliness is a discrepancy between what you perceive your social relationships to be and what you desire them to be. And that's all based on a single individual who, if they're motivated to reconnect, can work on changing how they're perceiving things or what their desires are. If you wanted to focus, for instance, on structural aspects of social connection, that requires another individual. It requires forming new connections, which sometimes might not be very feasible to do, especially in instances where there might be geographic distance issues or mobility issues. And that can be harder because it also requires a lot more social infrastructure that may or may not be available to someone based on where they're physically located. If you focus on the qualitative aspects of social connection, you need at least two people who are agreeing to both work on the quality of the relationship and changing their behaviors. But if we're focusing on a single individual, we can think about how we can change their perceptions of their social relationships or bring their desires more in alignment with the experience that they are having. This is one of the reasons why, across multiple different studies that have looked at different types of interventions to address loneliness, those that have shown the most efficacy are those that are based on adapting maladaptive social cognitions, those that take approaches that are based in CBT principles and really try to address the way that people are perceiving their social environments and thinking about their social interactions. Now, you might assume that, well, people are going to be lonely if they're socially isolated. People who are socially isolated are going to be lonely. But that's not necessarily the case. These are indeed distinct constructs. Only about 2/3 of socially isolated individuals feel lonely. So here you could see social isolation is on the x-axis and on the y-axis is loneliness. And there are certainly individuals who are extremely isolated and extremely lonely because of it. But there are also individuals that are extremely lonely, even though they're not much more or even less isolated than the average individual. Likewise, there are individuals who are very isolated, but they enjoy that solitude and they don't experience any discrepancy between what they have and what they want because that's what they're looking for is solitude. They're happy with the thermostat being set at 68 degrees. So now that we have a good understanding of what it is that we're studying, what is it that we found in the past 15 years that makes me say that social integration should be considered a vital sign for health? Well, we've got nearly 10,000 publications, and many of those show a strong link between loneliness and mental health conditions, in particular depression. We also see links with loneliness and cardiovascular disease, with loneliness and dementia, and that's both Alzheimer's disease as well as all-cause dementia, with cancer, with various sleep disorders. This list goes on, but these are the ones that there's really robust literatures on. And these aren't necessarily small risks either. For example, a study in 2022 found that for people who are lonely, the risk of all-cause dementia over a 10-year period was 3 times greater than for those who weren't lonely in the absence of other genetic predispositions. The mechanisms by which loneliness gets under the skin is an area that has experienced a lot of growth, and yet we're still asking for a lot of answers. So, loneliness is thought to be an evolutionary adaptation to social isolation. Humans are born to the longest period of abject dependency of any species, and it is very physically threatening for humans to have to encounter more nimble, larger predators or harsh environmental conditions in the absence of a group. And so, in the same way that the sensation of pain can help reduce your likelihood of interacting with a noxious stimulus, the same way that experiencing hunger can motivate you to find food, loneliness is thought to be a sensation that motivates reconnection to help protect in these potentially treacherous environments. Now, there are certainly events in modern day that can trigger loneliness because of social isolation. So a common one is when people young adults first enter college. Another one is when people become widowed. And having a desire to reconnect with people, feeling that loneliness, can be really adaptive for helping them adjust to their new social reality. Some of the social cognitive changes that happen with loneliness is an increased focus on environmental cues, cues of safety and threat, and in particular, social cues of safety and threat that can help individuals figure out how to navigate their new social environment. But the reality is that most of the time in our current world, we aren't in situations where we're physically threatened because we're alone. And these feelings, this discrepancy between the relationships that we have and the relationships that we desire, can lead to chronic social stress and stress physiological systems that are responsible for managing our response to actual abject threats. Loneliness then leads to an othering of self, where we see ourselves as separate from other people, and leads us to behave in ways that make it harder for us to connect. What does this look like in terms of the biological mechanisms that underlie the links between loneliness and chronic disease? We see immune system dysregulation and high levels of inflammation in individuals who have heightened levels of loneliness, as well as neuroendocrine alterations, in particular with respect to neurosteroids that are responsible for regulating our stress response. Together, these systems tax various different physiological systems so that we have accelerated biological aging. And they change the way in which we think about the world. They change our neural functions and connectivity patterns in a way that supports these social cognitive biases and makes it harder for people to reconnect. So this is supposed to be talk about what we don't know about loneliness and what the future of loneliness research entails. I'm no longer a practicing researcher in this field. Now I am a program officer at the National Institutes of Health. And in that capacity, I get to speak with some of the brightest minds about their newest ideas about where they're going to take their research programs. And so I've tried to distill down the 3 different directions that I think are really important for the research here. The first is understanding temporal dynamics of loneliness and the causes and consequences of these temporal dynamics. So I mentioned that loneliness is an adaptive response to being isolated, for instance, after widowhood or after you've moved to a new location. But what changes from an acute bout of loneliness from which individuals can recover to the chronic loneliness that's associated with all of these poor health outcomes? Let's back up a moment and think about the fact that loneliness is highly variable across the lifespan. So this is across a 4-year period, and the size of the bars here, this is using representative data from the Health and Retirement Study. The size of the bars here represent the proportion of the sample that follows each of the different trajectories, where the yellow bars are ultimately people who end up lonely at the time of mortality, and the gray bars are the people who ended up not lonely at the time of mortality. And you can see there's a lot of different variation here. And yet, even a single instance of loneliness, as represented by the yellow bars here, is associated with greater morbidity. So even though there's so much variation here and people recover from their loneliness, there's something that's happening that's changing their biological trajectories, potentially related to the rewiring and this othering of self that we see. And a question here is, what is the timescale at which these changes are happening? Which is absolutely critical if we're going to intervene, because we need to know, is this adaptive response that's going to motivate these reconnections? Or is this individual on a trajectory where they're going to begin to experience chronic maladaptive social cognitions? We know that loneliness follows a certain trajectory across the lifespan where it tends to be higher in young and older adulthood. But what we don't know is if bouts of loneliness at different points in this time span are associated with periods of vulnerability for health impacts. And so understanding these temporal dynamics and really piecing them apart is going to require some paradigm changes in how we're studying loneliness, how we're measuring it, and additional computational approaches that can take advantage of complex time series data. It's going to require more interdisciplinarity than there currently is in this research field. Another direction that I see a lot of research is focusing on uncovering basic biological mechanisms and consequences of loneliness. So I talked to you about the different biological systems that are impacted by loneliness. And yet, even though we've seen a lot more interdisciplinarity in the field of research focused on loneliness, and we've seen deeper and deeper dives into biological mechanisms, most of this work is still largely descriptive, comparing people who are lonely at the time that they present in a lab and people who aren't. Now, there's compelling stories that you can tell from some of this data. I find this one in particular really compelling. What you're looking at here is transcriptome-wide profiles of inflammation. And what you can see is that for lonelier individuals, they have an upregulation of genes that are associated with inflammatory processes that would help them respond to inflammation-mediated infections. Those would be the ones that they would be more prone to if they were objectively isolated. And importantly, you see a downregulation, which is presented in red, of antiviral responses, genes that are responsible for antiviral responses, which you would be most suspect to if you were interacting with others. And so there is this changing of the transcriptome to adapt to the conditions that may have evolutionarily led to the experience of loneliness. But this is a snapshot at a single moment in time. And so what is the pathway that we get here? And is loneliness a causal factor here? Those sorts of questions somewhat remain to be seen. Now, I think that there's real opportunity for genetic analysis methods, in particular things like functional genomics and Mendelian randomization, that can leverage GWAS and try to understand potential causal mechanisms here. And what I'm showing you here, and I'm realizing that this figure is a bit small, is that SNPs that are associated with loneliness are associated with a wide variety of health conditions. So if you look, the line that's going down here suggests that there would be no effect, and most of the effects are indicative of loneliness and genes associated with loneliness having some causal roles and conditions. But importantly, the largest effects are in mental and behavioral disorders. So I really think that in particular in the realm of mental health, looking at loneliness as a potential causal target and trying to understand the biological mechanisms by which we move from a state of loneliness to one of these other states is really critical for thinking about how we're going to intervene, for thinking about how we decide, is someone who is presenting to a clinic with a degree of loneliness on a trajectory where we need to intervene? And if so, what's the best way to do that before they start presenting with a full-blown mental health condition? Finally, I think we need to consider loneliness in context. And this, I think, is going to be one of the real big challenges for the field as we move forward. Most fields are cumulative. You can focus on research from 2 decades ago, seminal papers, and you can say, okay, this is an established effect, now let's build off of that. But social relationships are subject to changing social norms and changing culture. And we have seen an increasing degree of social isolation, in particular in the United States. So that social isolation, sociologists have many different thoughts for why that is. This is time spent alone. This is fewer confidants. And there's many reasons that could be related to geographic mobility associated with jobs, a decreased investment in social infrastructure. But one of the common predictors of this is technologically mediated interactions and our increasing reliance on and ease of using and comfort with using our phones and computers to interact with others. And there's a question here as to how do we count when we're thinking about trying to understand, is this person lonely but still socially connected because they have the ties? Or are they lonely and also socially isolated because they're sitting alone in a room? How do we map that on to previous literature, to previous knowledge, to build a cumulative field and understand these effects on health? I think we can all agree that the pandemic was a natural experiment to understand some of these impacts. And research from the pandemic does show that more rich social environments, social cues from like video chats are very useful for reducing loneliness in the absence of other interactions. Artificial intelligence is also going to change the game here. Artificial intelligence is here to stay, and we now have chatbots that people can connect with. In fact, any of you might have a confidant in your phone right now. And how do we use these? How do we tap into therapeutic potential of technologically mediated interactions, of artificial intelligence, and use that to try to resolve discrepancies between our perceived and our desired social interactions? And what are the consequences for that when we get to a moment where the technologically mediated or the AI agent won't suffice? That person cannot be there for you when you need to go to the hospital. So I've highlighted a few different areas. I would really love to foster a bit of a conversation on this, but I want us to take a step back and think about the question that I started this with. And if the next time that you were at your provider's office for your annual physical, your provider, just the same way that they took your blood pressure, that they measured your other vital signs, asked you about the people that you could confide in and noticed trends in your chart, how might that change the way that they interacted with you? The referrals, the services that they referred you to, the way in which they prospectively treated risk for disease. We could get there, but the future of loneliness research really needs to better understand the timescale at which this is happening, the biological mechanisms, and understand this in the changing social context. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Okay, team, this is audience participation mandatory, so feel free to line up at one of the microphones. Thank you so much, Dr. Necka, for the amazing talk. I wanted to start the ball rolling with the question I'm sure you're asked about all the time in this area about the phones. So I live with a college student, and I've often wondered if we need to take an intermittent fasting approach, that you have to actually physically be not connected to your phone to reset what you consider to be healthy social connection or loneliness. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And
Yeah.
we welcome folks to come up, ask questions. We really deliberately do a shorter talk because this is an area we want to build as a department. So it's important to take advantage of Dr. Necka's expertise.
Yeah, thanks. I think it really depends on what they are using their phones for. So, as I mentioned, the pandemic presented a unique opportunity to really try to understand what technologically mediated interactions can do for our feelings of social connection. That's in the absence of having other relationships. And so there is work that suggests that foregoing an opportunity to connect with someone over dinner who's sitting there physically in front of you for your phone is problematic and is associated with worse loneliness. But if someone is on FaceTime in a very rich environment where there's lots of social cues, there's a lot of ways in which someone can integrate and map on to a face-to-face interaction, that seems to be less associated with loneliness than interactions that are fully text-based and not very much devoid of social cues. So should we take an intermittent fasting? I think that goes back to that question about the temporal dynamics of loneliness.
Thank you so much for this talk. I actually defended my dissertation on loneliness in Cambodian Americans this week, so I was really ecstatic.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's my research interest, so I'll come up. So I was ecstatic to hear that, same week, it was like really nice. I'm curious if you could speak to research on cross-cultural factors that shape loneliness conceptualizations and where you think that might fit in the future directions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that so originally when I was trying to think about this talk, that focus on temporal dynamics was a bit broader, and I do think that the way in which we define loneliness might be changing as a function of all of these factors. So not only time, but also the changing social context. Much of the research has been in Western countries and certain cultural norms, but I do think that that distilling loneliness down into this discrepancy allows for sort of with being an individual, the discrepancy between what they have and they want allows for it to apply more homogeneously across different cultures because it's all based on the individual and the cultural milieu in which their desires and perceptions are forming. But I do think that we need better measurements and we need more diverse individuals and researchers and research communities that are participating in this work.
Excellent talk. Thank you so much. So I'm interested in these blue zones across the globe. I think you've probably heard of them. There's 5 or 6 of them where people live very long. These centurion rates are very, very high. And I'm just wondering if these are communities that are highly social and have high social interactions, and if that work sort of ties in. Just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. As far as I know, they are, but I don't know that it's causal. So part of the reason why people have fewer social connections in particular as they age is because of some health issues that can impact their ability to engage in social interactions, right? And so that's one of the challenges here, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we need to move a little bit more towards focusing on genetic influences, is to try to disentangle what directionality, which can be hard to do in a situation like that. We've got these blue communities where people do live really long lives, and they are able to socialize much beyond your average American citizen, for instance. But the question is, which came first?
Liz, so I'm a little concerned by what you presented with respect to the type of research I do. So it seems like loneliness, this umbrella term of social disconnection, has so many influences on all sorts of health, and including brain and other biological measures that I measure. And so I don't do this. Like, I don't measure social loneliness or social disconnection, et cetera, in my research. And now I really think that maybe I have to. Can you speak about some of if there are easy ways to measure this?
Yeah, the current gold standard for assessing loneliness, because it is based on perceptions and desires, is self-report. There's a lot of concerns about that in terms of generalizability, in particular with people who might not have good insight or good communicative abilities. And there's also concerns, just your standard concerns with self-report measures. There's a real commonly used item scale, which is a 3-item loneliness scale. So there has been a push amongst some geriatric practitioners to focus on this, at least in older adult health, included in assessments in the clinic. And it's been adopted by a lot of nationally representative studies. So it has really good psychometric properties. There's 3 items to it. I'm happy to send you a reference. There's a discussion in the field, though, about whether that's too simple. So that assumes that loneliness is unidimensional And some of the older work on loneliness suggested that there might be two factors. One that's focused more on emotional loneliness, which is when there's a discrepancy between your perceived and your desired relationships in intimate ties, so like your spouse or children or close friends, and social loneliness, where there's a discrepancy between your connection, your perceived and desired connections in your broader community. So ties that you might have with colleagues, for instance. And there's some newer papers that are suggesting that we might want to go back to that, and that complicates measuring this in a quick, quick measures. But yes, there is a 3-item scale that is fairly easy to add to your standard battery of questionnaires when you're doing research.
Sure. Just to summarize, I'm a child psychiatry fellow, and I found the biological impact of loneliness that you mentioned pretty significant in terms of mortality, cardiovascular outcomes. And I was wondering, from a clinical perspective, is there any evidence or what are your thoughts generally on AI and its role in alleviating loneliness? I would imagine its application in age homes where, that's more of a risk. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on the literature on that.
Yeah, there's not much of a literature on it because AI is so new. But there is a lot of therapeutic potential there, especially given that so much of what has been demonstrated to be efficacious is based on adapting these social cognitions. And in younger adults, there's some work that social skills training can also be really helpful for loneliness because those maladaptive social cognitions get translated into behavior and that sort of othering of self that I mentioned. So I think that AI has the potential to serve as a companion to teach people. I didn't like how you said that to me, which is something that an adolescent probably wouldn't say to another adolescent. They would probably just, stop engaging with that person. However, there's a lot of risk there as well because how the AI responds is going to be a function of how it's trained, and they're constantly learning the AI models. And there's also a risk of real dependency on AI. So lonelier individuals tend to be more likely to have parasocial relationships, which is feeling like you have a relationship with someone that is one-sided, like a book character or a celebrity. And they also tend to be more likely to anthropomorphize. So, feeling an attachment to their Roomba. They don't want any Roomba when theirs is broken. They want their Roomba back, right? So there's a real risk that if we tap into that therapeutic potential for AI, that we set them up for a situation that makes it harder for them to form in-person, real-life social interactions. So that's a long way to say I don't know, but I think this is an area that we need a lot more research.
Thank you. I think what is most enlightening was the fact that my intuitive guess is that you need that human connection for the sense of isolation to go away, but it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. And again, it's more studies are required.
I think that's right, yeah. And more studies are certainly required.
So much for a fantastic talk. I wanted to ask a quick question just about the new direction in terms of temporal dynamics, because there's a lot of different ways it seems to me that the studies could go. And so you showed some data, doing almost like a yearly kind of assessment to loneliness, but then you could also think about ecological momentary assessment studies that would try to capture that on a much finer grained time scale. And I didn't know if, just from your perspective, if there was a particular sampling window that you think might be most informative or kind of most exciting in this particular area.
I think both are important. So there's some research that suggests that measuring on ecological momentary assessment, where you're doing 4 to 5 assessments a day, explains only about 25% of the variance in trait level loneliness. So ecological momentary assessment will be measured with questions like, I felt left out today, or I felt left out in the last 2 hours. Whereas trait loneliness is, I generally feel left out, right? And so it only explains about 25% of that variability. So I do think we need more. There's a paper that came out last year that was looking at the influence, put both ecological momentary assessments of state loneliness and trait loneliness into a model together, and both are important for predicting depression and anxiety in young adults. But interestingly, some of the features of the EMA assessments that they thought might be relevant. So how quickly do you oscillate, for instance, between high levels of loneliness and low levels of loneliness, or are you more stable? And what is the variability overall? Those were not as predictive. So it was much more just the mean state level loneliness. So that suggests that you might not need to do EMA for a long time, maybe just get a sample to get an assessment at the state level of what that looks like.
This is a very cerebral group. I can use the percolating. Thank you so much, Dr. Necka. Thank you so much for a really stimulating talk on such an interesting, extraordinary topic. So thank you again. I wanted to close with a couple remaining thank yous and acknowledgements. And I know this is the first time I've ever ended Research Day on time or a little early, so you're welcome. Thank you. So I wanted to acknowledge earlier today we had a dozen students from the Baltimore City KIPP Academy Middle School. So these were science fair winners and science fair participants in a program this year. So I wanted to especially thank our first year child psychiatry fellows who were the middle school wranglers of the day. They had the task of helping them participate in a science scavenger hunt during the poster session. So thank you to the first year fellows. They may be back in clinic already, but. And then finally, is Catherine here? Catherine, are you here? Stand up. Catherine McDonald, future boss of us all, is my wonderful research assistant. We call planning this event like planning our annual wedding together every year. But this is a really special year for a lot of reasons, one of which is that Catherine just graduated from the School of Public Health just within the last 2 weeks. I'm sure, though, since it's her favorite holiday, she'll be back every year for Research Day. So thank you, Catherine, for everything you do. If you liked anything about today, it was all Catherine's fault. So thank you again. Okay, we're going to close with a pledge. Please raise your right hand. I pledge to think about this week how I can get more involved in research in my awesome department. And as you come up with a good idea, send me an email. I want to hear it. All right. Thank you so much and happy Research Day.